Today on All Things 80s, answering your questions. Welcome back to All Things 80s. Now, a couple weeks back, I put out the post asking for your questions, and I expected to get maybe 2 or 3. Well, in actual fact, I got so many that I'll need to break this Q&A video down into a number of parts. So if your questions aren't answered in this video, don't worry, they will be answered in future videos. So to start things off, we have a couple of questions from Daniel, and he gets to go first because he is a Patreon. So Daniel asks, the first question is, what are your top 5 pop culture movies from the 80s? And he also asks, what other toys do you have from the 80s? Do you actively collect other lines today? Well, with regards to movies, believe it or not, I'm not really that into movies. In terms of top 5 pop culture movies from the 80s, well, obviously Star Wars. And lately, I've been getting into horror movies. For the longest time, I was never into horror movies because I was always scared, but I'm really into them now. And I've been particularly enjoying the Halloween and Friday the 13th franchise of movies because they were done in the 80s, and it's nice to go back in time and see what teenagers were up to in those days. You know, I was never a teenager. Well, I was eventually, but you know what I mean, like a 18-year-old who did teenage things in the 80s, never got to experience that. Now, what other toy lines? Well, currently I have a few mask items that I definitely intend to add to, and I have one Action Force figure, which is something again I'm going to add to. But first and foremost, I'm still focusing on rebuilding my Star Wars collection. Now, a couple of lines that I also want to get back into, and another get into for the first time. So Transformers was something I had a few of back in the 80s, and I'd like to really get back into those. And Masters of the Universe I never had as a child. I've mentioned it before, but when faced with the option of getting 2 or 3 Star Wars figures for the price of one Masters of the Universe, I always went with the Star Wars. So next up we have a series of questions regarding future Hasbro Retro Collection releases. These questions, I should say, come from Jace and Juliana's World, Joseph Productions, Chasing Monsters, and from Moses, asking what I would like to see in future releases and what I think will be released. So, what I would like to see from future retro collection releases, I may have to assume the next wave, Wave 3, will be focused on Return of the Jedi. So, what I would like to see in terms of figures that were never released by Kenner, I want to see a proper final duel look with the correct tunic, obviously Slave Leia. Lando in Han's clothes would be nice, a Y-Wing pilot, and Force Ghost figures of Yoda and Obi-Wan, and perhaps Darth Vader with a removable helmet would be nice. What I think will probably happen when we get round to next year's release, I imagine it'll probably be something like this. So it'll probably be Luke Jedi, Han in trench coat, Leia in the poncho, the Emperor, the Biker Scout, and I think we have to pretty much accept there will be an Ewok in this release, so Chief Chirpa or Wicket. And for the special figure that's going to be released as part of a game, that has to be the Slave Leia, surely. And would I like to see vehicles and playsets? Absolutely. I wish they would just release the entire line as part of a retro collection, because I would certainly snap those up. Now, next up, we got a couple of questions on the same subject from Team Uzi Mods and from Gavin, both asking how to deal with depression. So if you look at my channel, I do have a playlist created of all the videos I've done covering this subject, and I highly recommend anyone who is maybe suffering, go check those out. But in terms of how to deal with depression, what I can say is you have to remember that however bad you're feeling at this moment in time, you have to know that it's not going to last forever. You have to be hopeful and look to the future and know that what you're feeling right now will not be what you're feeling in a day or a week from now. I know firsthand how easy it is to get caught up in depression, and you think that, life isn't worth living and you'll never become anything in life and you just want to end it. Been there, done that. And I can tell you that life is definitely worth living. So find something to distract yourself from the depression. So it could be watch a movie, listen to music, take up a hobby, just do something that you love and gives you pleasure. And you'd be surprised how quickly those feelings of depression will dissipate, and you'll think to yourself, wow, I can't believe I was depressed. I feel pretty good now. Now, bear in mind, I am not medically qualified to give any advice. I can only share my experiences. And as I mentioned, I do have quite a few videos on this topic, and I highly recommend anyone who is feeling depressed to go check those out. You will see in the progress I made, I guess it was 18 months ago that I quit taking any form of medication. And while the withdrawals from that medication were absolutely horrendous, here I am 18 months later, and I do feel wonderful now. And I'm very fortunate to still be here, put it that way. It was coming up for 12 years. It'll be May 24 that will mark 12 years since I more or less left this earth, if that's one way of putting it. I was lucky in that I was found in time and resurrected, and here I am. I'm very thankful to still be here. So take it from me, it is possible to get through some of the darkest depressions that you're experiencing. Just don't give up hope and reach out, talk to somebody. That's one of the best things you can do. I was put on all these medicines, and sure, they do work to an extent, but the negative side effects that these medicines create for me just weren't worth it. But just being open and talking about how you're feeling and having someone with a sympathetic ear can go a long way to making you feel much better again. So never give up hope, and just know that it will pass and you will feel good again. So now we have two questions on the same subject. These questions came from MS, and that one time asking how I ended up in America. Well, technically, it's all down to George Lucas, believe it or not. Let me explain. Back when Attack of the Clones was released, my friend and I, who were both really into Star Wars, decided that on the day of release, we would go and see the movie back to back, 2 times back to back. So we left work it was a Friday, I think. We left work and went to the movie theatre, got our tickets for the first showing, sat down, watched the movie, and as the credits rolled, we looked at each other and said, what the hell was that? Let's go to the pub. So we went to a bar in Edinburgh, Scotland, and for a few beers. And when we sat there, we could hear these American accents. So we realized it was a couple of gals from America were over visiting Scotland. So we got talking to them, and we exchanged email addresses, and I kept in touch. And one of the girls was coming back on a trip to London. So I suggested, look, if you're in London, you may as well come back up to Scotland. So she did. And we took a trip to Amsterdam and indulged in some of the things that Amsterdam has to offer. And it kind of took off from there. And so I guess it was 2003 that I moved to America and we got married. And it was wonderful. But over time, it became apparent that we weren't necessarily that compatible. Clearly, I was still someone who loved my toys and music and things, and this was a a pretty, career-driven lass, and it just was not working. Uh, so we obviously divorced, but we still remain on good terms, which is wonderful. So now I'm back with wife number two, who is absolutely fantastic and just so supportive. I couldn't ask for better, honestly couldn't. So I've been here, I guess, going on 17 years. And yeah, so I'm in New York City, which honestly, people think it's the most wonderful city in the world. I certainly don't. It's overpopulated, it's extremely expensive, and as a result, I'm living in a studio apartment, and it's a basement apartment at that. So it's not the best living arrangements for someone who wants to have a huge toy collection. So that's something I'm going to focus on and try to arrange things a bit better. So yeah, that's how I got here. George Lucas made a bad movie, and because of that, I ended up in America. So now I've got a question from Mitternacht. I hope I said that correctly. Asking my opinion on Repro. Well, I love Repro. I have no hesitation in endorsing Repro, simply from the fact that if you are, like me, trying to rebuild a Star Wars collection, there are certain figures out there that go for thousands upon thousands of dollars. And unless you're a millionaire, these figures are pretty much out of reach. However, Smith Lord Creations, who I've bought a number of items from, are doing some fantastic work, and they are putting Hasbro to shame. And the fact that you can get a Yak Face or a Luke Stormtrooper for like $40, as opposed to the thousands it's going to cost to get an original Kenner, it makes sense just to go down that route. Now, I will stress that I do want the repros to be marked as such so that they cannot be passed off as originals. It's getting more and more difficult with weapons, especially to sort of discern the differences between a repro and an original. So that's one sort of area that I'm not that comfortable with. But over the piece, if you want to have a nice looking collection and you don't want to be spending thousands of dollars, Repro is the way to go. And I just mentioned Smith Lord Creations. I know there are other companies that do some pretty nice work too, but that's the company that I've been buying stuff from. I highly recommend them. And also, not only are they doing repros, they're also bringing out a whole line of figures from the Star Wars movies that were never released back in the day. And they're not quite ready yet, and especially because of what's going on in the world, they've been delayed a little bit. But once they are released, I cannot wait to get my hands on them, because some of the figures that they are producing are figures that really should have been done back in the 80s. So yes, I do like Repro, and I thoroughly endorse places like Smith Lord Creations. And if you are on a limited budget but you want certain figures, that's the way to go. So I've got a question here from Javier, and he's saying, "Hi Dean, what are your musical talents? Have you considered doing any of your own music for your videos, or is royalty-free music what you'd prefer?" Well, anytime you hear music in any of my videos, that's all music that I've done myself. I certainly wouldn't say I'm talented by any stretch of the imagination, but I can get by on guitar, bass, drums, and keyboard. I cannot sing, but I can get by on those instruments. I'm not particularly good at any one, but I can get by on all four. And I've certainly never used any royalty-free music. I really want to get back into music and do more of it, but I'm just thinking that no one really wants to listen to what I have to create, so it's always in the back of my mind that I want to start doing it again, like really get into it and do an album or something. But I don't know. I guess no one would really want to hear what I have to offer. But yeah, I do my own music in my videos. So this question comes from Slake Jake, and it's a good question. He says, "Here's one for you. A Kenner-like action figure line based on Duran Duran's Wild Boys video. 1. How cool would that be? And 2. If it was offered now, would you purchase? You bet I would. That would be the ultimate figure line that for me to collect. Now, I did get hold of the recent Funko Pops Duran Duran figurines, whatever you call these things, and they were pretty disappointing, to be honest. And they actually chose the worst looking era of the band to do these figures. And as you mentioned, the Wild Boys line would have been perfect, because that video, they were like sort of Mad Max superhero type characters, and that would have made good Funko Pops. But you bet, if there were to be a 3 3/4 inch line of Duran Duran figures, I would buy them in a second. Right, so that wraps things up for this part 1 of the Q&A. And if your question wasn't answered in this video, please don't despair. I will be answering all the questions. Just far too many to do in the one video. And again, I thank you so much for submitting those questions. I had no idea there would be so many, so I feel very humbled by that, and thank you so much. Now, there will be more videos up this week looking at all things 80s, as always. So I ask you, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so. And as always, stay tuned for more videos from all things 80s.